I'm a big believer in reading stories aloud to children. When my kids were little, my wife and I read to them all the time, and I suspect that's one reason that both of my children have really good vocabularies. And when I was a kid, adults read aloud to me. My mom, of course, but I remember that my 4th grade teacher read the book Charlotte's Web aloud to us. And then I remember my 6th grade teacher read a book called Rabbit Hill aloud to us. Reading stories to children is very powerful. And any of you adults who listen to audiobooks know the power of stories out loud. Stories are interesting, and stories can often be understood more readily than heavy conceptual language. Everybody tells stories, and everybody listens to them. Everybody has some stories, and really, everybody is a story. Well, the center of our Christian tradition is a man of 1,000 stories. Jesus told stories, and people told stories about Jesus. They're written down in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, each year in church, we focus on one of the Gospels. Starting now in this season of Advent, this year our focus is going to be the Gospel of Mark. It's my favorite. Partly I kind of like the name, but mostly it's because I find Mark so interesting. It is the shortest of the 4 Gospels. Mark tells the whole story more quickly and concisely than the other 3 do. It's also the most intense in some ways. The emotions of Jesus are closer to the surface in Mark's Gospel than in the others. It's also the oldest. We are almost certain that Mark was the first of the 4 Gospels to be written. The other 3 Gospels used Mark's in their own work, sometimes word for word, sometimes tweaking it for their own purposes. The 4 Gospels have an agenda, of course. They are not biographies of Jesus in the modern sense. Instead, they are traditions collected and celebrated by different communities which were devoted to Jesus. Each gospel does have its own spin and its own message, and each gospel has its own image of Jesus. Now, each gospel is an overall big story while being made up of smaller stories within it. So here we are at the year of Mark. Today we start with the opening words, the beginning of the gospel about Jesus. Now, I really wish people could understand that clearly. The word gospel means good news. It's good news. The Christian religion has not always been seen as good news. Too often it's been about rules and fear and condemning people and controlling people. Too often the church has obscured the good news. That word gospel means news that is good, and the gospel is all about love and about compassion and about forgiveness and about community. And of course, above all, the Gospels are about Jesus. The Jesus of Mark's Gospel is an epiphany of God. He is what God looks like for us. He is what God acts like for us. And we will see Jesus as God's epiphany again and again in Mark's Gospel. He's going to heal the sick and raise the dead and forgive sins and walk on water and be revealed in glory on a mountain. The Jesus of the Gospels is also a for real, honest-to-God human being. He calls himself in this Gospel the Son of Man, which is a Hebrew way of saying the human being. He's an example for us to follow. He's a model for us to imitate. And we're going to see Jesus as an example of true humanity again and again in Mark's Gospel. He's going to get angry. He's going to show compassion. He's going to be frustrated. He's going to make friends. He'll get tired. He'll enjoy banquets. And he will tell stories. For the next year, we are going to hear Mark's Gospel stories. And we're going to see Jesus as God's epiphany. And we'll see Jesus as a for real human being. That is Mark's agenda, Mark's message, Mark's spin. Now, I said how important it is to read aloud to children. I have also, of course, read aloud to my grandchildren. And I really like reading Dr. Seuss aloud, because I read Seuss to my own children, their dad and their Aunt Marie, and they're fun. But my granddaughters, even when they were only 4, could sense the agenda in these stories. There was The Cat in the Hat, which is about what happens when you're unsupervised by adults. There was The Butter Battle Book, which is about the foolishness of modern war. The Lorax is about how we must protect our natural world from pollution. Did I Ever Tell You How Lucky You Are? Is a story about being thankful. And then there was The Sneetches, which is about the silliness of prejudice. And What Was I Afraid Of? Is a story about facing our fears. So then I tried Dr. Seuss's Sleep Book. It's about the joys of getting ready for bed and going to sleep at night. Even when my granddaughters were 4 years old, they could smell this agenda a mile away. They liked all the other Dr. Seuss books. I read them, but when I got to the Sleep Book, they didn't like that one so much. They knew there was an agenda here. They knew the grown-ups wanted them to go to bed, and that was not their agenda. After I read 4 pages, they got up and ran away. Oh well. Mark the Evangelist has an agenda. We'll be exploring it together over the next year. We're going to see Jesus through what Mark says. Jesus will be an epiphany of God, showing us what God is like. And Jesus will be an example of true human being, showing us how to live a human life in God. That's Mark's agenda. And by the way, it is the opposite of Dr. Seuss's Sleep Book. Dr. Seuss's Sleep Book wants to help kids fall asleep. Mark's book, Mark's Gospel, wants to wake us up. Mark says, wake up, pay attention, He is here. That's his story. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Amen.